This week, Colossal Biosciences confirms something that changes the entire story. Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi are now old enough to breed. More pups are expected by the end of 2026. And the question that the scientific debate about these animals has been avoiding for 14 months is now immediate and real. What does the next generation look like? Because the answer, based on basic genetics, is not what most people expect. The second generation will not look like their parents. It will look more like a dire wolf. Part 1. What just happened? Let me tell you exactly where things stand right now because the timing matters. Romulus and Remus are 19 months old. Khaleesi is 15 months. In wolf terms, that is reproductive age. Not old enough to be dominant breeders in an established wild pack, but biologically capable. The machinery is there. Matt James, Colossal's chief animal officer, confirmed this week that the plan is to create an interbreedable population of dire wolves that eventually sustains itself naturally. Not 3 animals on a reserve indefinitely. A population, one that breeds on its own and maintains itself without Colossal engineering every individual from scratch. And Ben Lamb, Colossal's CEO, said he hopes to have more dire wolf pups by the end of 2026. This is a significant shift in what the program is. For 14 months, it has been 3 specific animals on a managed reserve. A demonstration, a proof of concept. 3 individuals that Colossal could point to and say the pipeline works. Now it is becoming something else, a breeding program. With a stated goal of a self-sustaining population, and the genetics of what that population produces over successive generations is a question that nobody in the public conversation about these animals has properly addressed yet. Part 2. How the edits actually work. To understand what the next generation looks like, you need to understand something about how the 20 edits Colossal made actually function inside a living animal. Every gene in a mammal's body comes in 2 copies, one inherited from the mother, one from the father. When both copies of a gene are the same version, the animal is homozygous for that gene. When the 2 copies are different versions, the animal is heterozygous. Romulus and Remus were produced by editing gray wolf cells before implantation. The edits were made to 1 copy of each relevant gene, which means Romulus carries 1 edited version and 1 unedited gray wolf version of each of the 14 genes that Colossal targeted. He is heterozygous for all 20 edits. This matters because trait expression is not a simple on-off switch. Many physical traits are expressed more strongly when an animal carries 2 copies of the relevant variant rather than 1. 1 copy of a gene that produces thicker fur might produce moderately thick fur. 2 copies might produce significantly thicker fur. The relationship between gene copies and physical expression varies by gene and by trait, but the general principle is consistent. Heterozygous means partial expression. Homozygous means full expression. Romulus right now is heterozygous for all 20 dire wolf edits. He looks like a partial expression of the dire wolf phenotype. Broader skull than a gray wolf, thicker, paler coat, heavier build, but not a complete expression. 1 copy of each edit producing a partially expressed result. When Romulus breeds with Khaleesi, who carries the exact same 20 edits in the exact same heterozygous configuration, the offspring have a chance of inheriting both copies of each edited gene. For each edit, there is a 25% chance that a pup inherits the edited version from both parents and becomes homozygous for that specific variant. Across 20 edits, the probability that any given pup inherits all 20 in homozygous form is low. But the probability that it inherits at least some of them in homozygous form is very high. And the pups that inherit the most edits in homozygous form will express those traits more completely than Romulus or Remus or Khaleesi currently do. The second generation will not look identical to the first. Some individuals will look more like gray wolves because they inherited fewer edits. Some individuals will look more like dire wolves because they inherited more edits in their stronger homozygous form. And Colossal, running a managed breeding program with a stated goal of a more complete dire wolf phenotype, will select which individuals breed in the next cycle. This is not random, this is directed. Each generation of controlled breeding selects for more complete expression of the dire wolf traits. The population does not stay at the level of Romulus and Remus, it moves towards something more expressed, more complete, further from the gray wolf baseline with each cycle. Part 3. The inbreeding problem. Here is the practical problem that nobody at Colossal has fully addressed in public. 3 animals is not a founding population. In conservation genetics, the minimum viable population for long-term genetic health is generally considered to be around 50 individuals, with a minimum effective population size of about 500 to avoid inbreeding depression over many generations. 3 individuals produces catastrophic inbreeding within a few generations, regardless of how carefully the breeding is managed. Inbreeding depression is what happens when closely related animals breed repeatedly. The genetic diversity within the population decreases. Recessive harmful mutations that are normally masked by a healthy copy of the gene start appearing in both copies simultaneously. Immune function decreases. Fertility decreases. The population becomes vulnerable to diseases that a genetically diverse group would handle without issue. 3 founding individuals means every animal in the second generation is a sibling or a half-sibling. Every animal in the third generation is the product of those siblings breeding. The genetic bottleneck is severe, and it compounds with each generation. Colossal knows this. They have not announced a solution publicly, but the solution is obvious and is almost certainly already in progress. They need to produce more founding animals from the original cell lines, not from the pups. From the banked, edited gray wolf cells that produced Romulus and Remus in the first place. Using the same surrogate protocol, more animals with the same 20 edits, produced independently, not descended from Romulus and Remus, adding new genetic lineages to the founding population. This means the breeding program is not just Romulus and Khaleesi producing pups naturally. It is a managed program that produces additional founding animals in the lab and introduces them into the breeding population to maintain genetic diversity while directing the phenotype toward more complete dire wolf expression. By end of 2026, Colossal expects more pups. Some of those pups will be naturally produced. Some may be lab-produced additional founders. The distinction between those 2 categories is the difference between a natural population beginning and an engineered population being maintained at a specific genetic profile. Part 4. What if they reach the wild? This is the scenario that conservation geneticists are most concerned about and most reluctant to discuss in public because the answer is genuinely uncomfortable. Romulus and Remus are behind a 10-foot zoo-grade fence on a 2,000-acre reserve with drone surveillance. They are not in the wild. They cannot breed with wild gray wolves right now, but the previous scripts in this series established something relevant. Romulus spent weeks mapping the camera maintenance schedule before anyone noticed. The behavioral data suggests these animals are operating at the upper boundary of canid cognitive capacity. The reserve is large but finite. The population is going to grow. More animals means more pressure on the available space. And managed reserves have a history of eventually failing to contain what they were built to contain. Not through dramatic escapes, through the slow accumulation of small failures in systems that were not designed for indefinitely increasing animal populations. The wild gray wolf population in North America is estimated at around 17,000 individuals. Gray wolves and the colossal animals are genetically compatible. They can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. If a colossal animal breeds with a wild gray wolf, the 20 edited genes enter the wild population. Not one wolf, that wolf's offspring, and their offspring, and their offspring. Edited genes spreading through a wild population cannot be recalled. There is no mechanism to remove a specific genetic variant from a wild animal population once it is introduced. The spread follows the same mathematics as any gene that confers a fitness advantage or is simply neutral. It diffuses through the population at a rate determined by reproduction and migration.
And over generations, it reaches animals in places where no colossal researcher will ever check. The legal framework for managing this does not exist. As the previous script in this series established, Romulus and Remus have no legal status under any existing wildlife protection framework. The genes they carry have no regulatory classification. There is no agency with clear authority to prevent their spread into a wild population, and no protocol for what to do if it happens. Colossal's plan is controlled breeding within a managed population. The plan does not include a scenario where the controlled part fails. Plans that do not include failure scenarios have a specific track record in biology. Part 5. What the pups will actually be. By the end of 2026, if Colossal's timeline holds, there will be pups, natural pups, born on the reserve. not produced in a lab. The first generation of direwolf descendants, produced through actual reproduction rather than genetic engineering. Here is what the genetics tells us those pups will be. They will carry varying combinations of the 20 edited genes in varying configurations of homozygous and heterozygous expression. Some will look more like gray wolves. Some will look more like the partial direwolf phenotype of Romulus and Remus. A few, depending on which combinations they inherit, will express the edited traits more completely than any animal in the founding generation. Their behavioral profile is unknown. The 20 edits Colossal made targeted physical appearance, coat color, body size, skull shape. They did not target behavior. But behavior is not independent of physical structure. A broader skull changes how the jaw functions in a bite. A heavier body changes how an animal moves through terrain. A thicker coat changes thermoregulation and the conditions under which the animal is comfortable operating. Physical changes produce behavioral consequences even without direct behavioral editing. And the behavioral consequences of more completely expressed direwolf physical traits in animals already showing unusual cognitive sophistication are genuinely unknown. Nobody has observed this generation of animal. Nobody has studied its behavior. Nobody has modeled its ecological impact. The pups that arrive by end of 2026 will be the first data points in a question that has not been properly asked yet. What does a more complete expression of the direwolf phenotype do when it walks around in the world? The debate about whether Romulus and Remus are direwolves has been the wrong debate from the beginning. It was a debate about 3 specific animals and what label to put on them. That debate is now less relevant than it was, because the program has moved past 3 specific animals. The program is now about a population that will express its founding genome more completely with each generation of controlled breeding, a population that will grow in numbers and in phenotypic completeness simultaneously, a population that has no legal status, no established ecological role, no regulatory framework governing its expansion, and a stated goal of eventual self-sufficiency. Matt James said the plan is for them to eventually breed naturally to create a sustainable population of the world's first de-extinct species. That sentence contains an enormous amount of weight. Sustainable means self-maintaining. Self-maintaining means not requiring Colossal's ongoing management to persist. Not requiring Colossal's ongoing management to persist means a population of animals that no single company controls continues to exist and reproduce and interact with the ecosystems around it indefinitely. This is not 3 wolves on a reserve anymore. This is the beginning of a species reintroduction program for an animal that has not existed for 12,500 years, managed by a private company with a $10 billion valuation in a legal vacuum on a timeline measured in months. The pups are coming by end of 2026, and what they are will be determined not by a press release, but by what their inherited genome expresses when it meets the world. If the full story of what the scientific community actually thinks these animals are is what keeps you watching, our last video goes through the debate forensically. Watch We Were Wrong About the Direwolf Revival next. What Colossal said, what the scientists said, what both sides missed, and the species definition problem that nobody in this argument has cleanly resolved. Because what the pups inherit depends on what their parents actually are, and that question is still open.